good, guys? Yep. You all right, Andre? You gonna make it?
I'm gonna make it.
All right, I wanna make sure. Take your time. Take your time. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues. We're gonna get started. Before we do get started, I do want to announce that Delegate Turner will be back with us on Monday. She's safely back in her room. She's comfortable. She's relaxed, so she'll be back with us. And I believe with that, we'll go ahead and get started. We have a first bill. We have two bills today, so apparently people are scared to come into this committee. First bill is departmental, and I believe we have Regan Vaughn and Secretary Wu. Please come forward.
Good afternoon, Chair Wilson, Vice Chair Crosby, and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Portia Wu. I'm the Secretary of Labor for Maryland, and I am testifying in support of HB 102, the department's legislation which seeks to give the family program more time to allow for some seamless implementation. In our recent briefing to the committee, we gave the committee an update on our progress. As we prepare for launch, I think I noted the need to rethink the statutory framework, particularly for self-employed individuals. Maryland's statute is modeled on that of other states, and looking at their experience, very few self-employed individuals opt into the program. Through this bill, the department is requesting the ability to rethink how we can deliver paid leave to self-employed workers. So HB 102 repeals the language related to self-employed participation and replaces it with language directing the department to develop a new framework for participation through regulations. We intend to engage with stakeholders about exactly how that framework should look. We've already held 2 stakeholder sessions that included national and local partners, as well as self-employed individuals, and we want to continue that dialogue. It's also critical that this option be fiscally responsible, and we have recently gotten an actuarial contract approved, so of course we'll ask the vendor to model out proposals to help us make the best informed decision. We do have 3 sponsor amendments, and I've asked the Family Policy Director, Regan Vaughn, to speak to those. I do want to thank this committee for all of your support ever since the passage of the Time to Care Act in 2022. Obviously, there have been many twists and turns in the road. We still have a significant amount of work ahead of us, and the department is committed to delivering a best-in-class product for your constituents. We look forward to working with you, and with that, I request a favorable report on this bill. I'll turn it to Regan.
Thank you, Secretary. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Regan Vaughn. I'm the Director of Policy for the Family Division at the Maryland Department of Labor. Here in support of HB 102, you should have 3 amendments from the department in your packet for the bill, and I just want to briefly cover them. The first is an amendment that would allow the comptroller to share tax information with us. We are still working on the exact language with the comptroller's office, but this is part of our efforts to fight fraud. The more information and data sharing we can do with our sister agencies, the better equipped we are to find bad actors in the system, and so this would allow us to do that. The second amendment is designed to provide both the department and private plans more flexibility in issuing the benefit. Currently, the statute requires that the benefit be issued on a bi-weekly basis, and we're asking for the flexibility to issue it at least as often as biweekly. So if a private plan wants to pay on a weekly basis, they would be able to do so. And if we believe that's a better plan design, we would also have the flexibility to do that. And then the third amendment establishes what we're calling an anchor date. We realized as we were working through the regulations that we needed one certain date to base benefit determinations on, eligibility, benefit amount. And so we're calling this our anchor date, and we've defined it as the earlier of the date the individual applies or the date the leave begins. This also gives us the flexibility that if someone applies 60 days before the leave starts, we'll have the appropriate information to make that determination, and we don't have to hold the application until the leave starts. So with that, I would urge a favorable report of HB 102 with the amendments. Thank you.
Thank you. Briefly, on the bill, is there any other state that's provided this flexibility that you're looking for?
My understanding is the states that do have an option for the self-employed are all using the same model, and the take-up rate has been about 2%.
And so when you say the same model that we're currently using, or they have a different model, but everybody's using the same one?
They're using the same statutory language that we currently have.
Okay, and so we feel we need to do something. Is the goal to enhance it to where people would participate more, or just create it more flexible so we can maintain or deal with what we currently have, with the expectation of 1% to 2% participation?
We would like more participation. We want it to be a meaningful benefit.
Right.
And to be attractive to self-employed individuals. One of the criticisms of the current model is it's based on receiving a weekly wage, which we know a lot of self-employed individuals aren't paid that way. And so, they may have a contract basis where it's all coming in at once. They're not necessarily getting that steady income on a week-to-week basis. So it's square peg in the round hole type issue. We're shoving them into a model for wage-based workers and want to find a model that works better for them.
And throughout the other states that are using the self-employed, I'm assuming it's a similar participation, a lower participation, correct?
It's been low across the board except for Massachusetts, I believe.
So I guess my point is, the program does not hinge upon their participation, though, correct?
Correct.
All right, just want to make sure. And there's the ability to pay claimants more frequent, specific to self-employed individuals, or this all-around claimants?
All claimants.
Okay. Steve?
Thank you. Just real quick, how many people do you expect self-employed to participate? Do you have an idea?
I don't know if we have an estimate. We can get back to you. I mean, part of it is, I think we want to go back to the drawing board. As Regan noted, the participation rate has been super low in other states, and we're trying to figure out from stakeholder engagement, is there something to make it more workable, especially for, solo proprietors? They have different ways of doing things. We don't want it to be burdensome, but we can get back to you with some clear estimates.
It's mandatory for me to participate in it if I work, right? It's mandatory, but it's not mandatory for self-employed.
Employees, W-2 workers are required to participate. 1099 worker is not required to participate.
And there's no fiscal note attached to that, to this part of the bill.
Correct.
And you don't expect any more work from this? You don't think this will add anything to the program as far as costs?
We actually think it'll take a little bit of work away because the complexity of the current system would be replaced with a more streamlined system is the hope.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. What was the purpose of having the comptroller involved in this? I came in as you were talking about that.
So fraud and detecting fraud is a major area of work for us as we build this system. And one way to do that is to bounce data off sister agencies to see if a business was just created for purposes of family or a claimant is showing Maryland wages that aren't Maryland wages. And so we'd like the ability to interface with the comptroller's data to do a double check to see if the business or the individual is also registered with the comptroller's office.
So is this putting an imposition on the comptroller, or is it the other way around? Are you reporting to the comptroller, or is the comptroller reporting to you?
We would still need an MOU with the comptroller to work that out. Our current discussions are we are asking the comptroller to help us.
All right. So and that's in the form of an amendment. So I actually don't see what the language looks like, right? Because in other words, that's not in the bill. That's in an amendment that you're
Correct.
proposing. So we need to see the amendment.
Correct.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Seeing no more questions, I believe that concludes that bill hearing.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Last bill hearing we have for the day is House Bill 233. Delegate Vogel. Do you have a panel, sir?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chair, committee members, Delegate Vogel here with House Bill 233, a bill titled the Maryland Worker Freedom Act with the goal of banning captive audience meetings in the state of Maryland. I came and presented this bill last year, and there have been a number of developments since. One of the conversations that we had last year was regarding the National Labor Relations Board. At the time, there was an active case before the NLRB on captive audience meetings. And since then, the NLRB ruled that these meetings are against the NLRA and illegal. There have been a number of developments with the NLRB in just the last few days, including the firing of a member of the NLRB, and this decision is now in jeopardy. I will note that a number of states across the country, most recently Hawaii, but also including Connecticut, Maine, Minnesota, New York, Washington, Vermont, Oregon, have taken steps legislatively to ban these meetings. I'll very quickly just touch on what these meetings are, and I'm sure that the folks on this panel will as well. Workers are held against their will in these meetings during work hours. They are mandatory. They are they do not have the option of not participating. And during these meetings, there is either an anti-union, political or religious agenda that is pushed onto these workers. This is really the tool of choice for union busters here in Maryland and across the country. And again, based on a decision by the NLRB, should be considered illegal under the National Labor Relations Act. I urge a favorable report, and I will turn it over to the panel to share more on their personal stories and why this bill is so important.
Who wants to go?
I'll start. My name is Kayla Mock. I'm here on behalf of United Food and Commercial Workers Union Local 400. Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, it's good to be here and see you all. You know, I want to point out a couple of things. One, this is not a ban. Employers can still hold these meetings. It simply gives the employee the right to say no, to listen to political or religious rhetoric of any time. And then the other reason we get asked is, well, why do workers have to sit in these meetings? Most workers without contracts are considered at-will employees. That means they can be fired at any time for any reason. And so when workers are often organizing, this is when these meetings are held, and they fear retaliation. They're afraid of getting fired, disciplined, written up, et cetera. And so this is another preemption that we can really protect Maryland workers. We see all the great work that Maryland legislators are doing to make sure that its most vulnerable citizens are being protected in these really unprecedented times. And we believe that this is a bill that allows workers a little bit of freedom in their workspace. And so we urge a favorable report.
Chair Wilson, members of the committee, thank you for having me. My name is Matthew Girardi, and I serve as Political and Communications Director for ATU Local 689. Local 689 strongly supports HB 233 and urges this committee to issue a favorable report. As a 109-year-old union, we've seen quite a lot. Throughout our history, we've unfortunately had to fight tooth and nail to get fairness for our members. When we first began organizing, in fact, the companies that we were organizing proudly declared that their horses, their streetcars, their buses were more valuable than the lives of their workers. So we know all too well that companies will play dirty tricks like using captive audience meetings to scare workers into supporting their agenda, and this has got to stop. These shakedowns are just all too common. In fact, according to a 2015 survey, 1 in 4 workers had been directly contacted by their employer on political matters. Of those, 20% had been directly threatened with changes to wages, hours, or even employment status. Additionally, these forced meetings are used to coerce employees into voting against unions. The NLRB found that captive audience meetings are used in response to 89% of unionization drives and have had a profoundly chilling effect on the results of those efforts to unionize. Thankfully, the federal government, under the Biden administration, made these meetings illegal. However, in the face of a much less pro-worker administration, the rule that banned them faces deep threat. It is incumbent upon Maryland to be a leader and ensure that these tactics never return to our state, no matter who sits in the White House. HB 233, the Maryland Worker Freedom Act, is the vehicle for us to do so. It would make sure that workers are not forced to attend these meetings without whether companies' political, religious, or labor relations views are forced upon them. We thank Delegate Vogel for introducing this very worthy measure and urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Hi. Good afternoon. I would like to start off by thanking the committee for being here today to listen to my testimony regarding my support for the Maryland Worker Freedom Act, and thank you, Delegate Vogel. My name is Laura Jackson, and I've been employed at Mom's Organic Market in College Park, Prince George's County, Maryland, for 3 years. We successfully formed our union, which is represented by United Food and Commercial Workers, Local 400. During that time, we were forced into captive audience meetings led by the chief operating officer of the company in an attempt to coerce us into not holding an election for the union. They were failed attempts to rob us of our democratic freedom to form a bargaining unit. The meetings were out of touch and a time-wasting anti-union effort during which we could have been working. The company's intent was abundantly clear. They wanted to scare us from exercising our rights. I heard from many of my colleagues who were worried about what might happen to them if they had supported the union. Our bargaining unit voted overwhelmingly in support of the union, not once, but twice. And it is imperative that the workplace remain neutral when it comes to the federally protected rights that we have as workers. I urge you all to pass HB 0233 so that workers in Maryland are able to maintain political and religious autonomy in the workplace. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman Wilson, Vice Chair Crosby, members of the Economic Matters Committee. Terry Kavanaugh here on behalf of SEIU Local 500 in favor of House Bill 233. We've submitted our written testimony. I'll try not to repeat that or repeat what others have already said. I just want to make a couple of 2 or 3 points about the legislation. One is opponents may say that one is that this is preempted by the National Labor Relations Act. The fact that many other states have already passed it, I think would negate that argument. Second is that it's might be, well, it's unnecessary. As Delegate Vogel has said, the National Labor Relations Board has ruled that these should not be allowed by the National Labor Relations Act. But as he's also stated, we're in a time where nothing that the federal government does should be taken for granted just because it's been done before. So this would protect those rights. The other thing is Maryland over the last 15 years or so has been among the leaders of states to enhance and protect workers' rights. And this falls in lines with other legislation that the General Assembly has passed, many of it coming out of this committee. One we heard just earlier. Just to repeat one thing that was said, this does not prohibit an employer from having meetings to express their political or religious beliefs and what their workforce should or shouldn't do. It does not restrict that. It doesn't restrict them from saying what that they favor or would like their workforce to vote against unions. It just says that you don't have to be at such a meeting and action can't be taken against you. Thank you. Ask for a favorable report.
Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Donna Edwards. I'm president of the Maryland State and DC AFL-CIO. It's very good to be in front of you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and this committee. It's the first time. This is usually the committee I hang in, so thank you very much. I'm not going to repeat everything. You've heard it. You will hear that this violates businesses' First Amendment rights and Fourth Amendment rights. That has been litigated and proven false. It does not. But what it does do is protect the worker from explicit or not explicit threats because obviously the business has control over my wages and, you know, the money that I'm going to be making. So if I think I'm going to be retaliated against, then I'm going to these meetings and not, I mean, I don't need to hear somebody's political views, and I don't hopefully want to hear somebody else's, you know, more extreme views, whether they're on the left or the right. And this only says that the worker is not going to be retaliated against. If you're a religious organization, it does not restrict religious conversation or meetings. And it gives protections to the workers. You still have the freedom to have these meetings. It's just that you can't say you must participate in them. And then if you don't participate in them, retaliate against that worker. We see it as a freedom. We see it, you know, I can read you the court document on the First and Fourth Amendment that it does not apply, but I'm not going to waste your time on that, and I really appreciate the opportunity to oppose this, to support this bill and oppose captive audience meetings. Okay? Strike that from the record.
Don, it's always wonderful seeing your smiling face. I was wondering if you would crack a smile. Thank you. To my understanding, obviously, this has already been litigated in the federal court. However, the concern really is if things change federally, making sure that Marylanders are protected. It's also my understanding that you're not trying to prevent employers from holding these meetings. So, and I guess because I haven't read the law or the holding, when it comes to, let's say, a training meeting, you know, we have these required training meetings. Does it encroach upon this law when they start talking about, I guess, religion, obviously, or elections of any kind, like political elections? Or I'm trying to find out because I want to make sure that I understand what we're doing. It's not overly confusing. I just want to make sure that, for the record, everybody understands you're not trying to interfere with individuals having training meetings, correct?
No.
Having meetings on labor laws, explaining to people their rights as far as, you know, things that are required, or OSHA, correct?
Correct.
You're just saying that, to my understanding, that when it comes to any political or religious ideological or anti-union, so as long as it has to do with the employer's duties, you're not trying to restrict that, correct?
Correct. We're following what you all have passed for state employers. We already have this for state employers. Cannot use state money for captive audience meetings.
And I believe, is it Ms. Jackson? Did you go to any of those meetings that you were requested to go to?
I did. So they were held at a time when we were going over work-related topics.
Right.
And then the CEO became present multiple times and continued to speak on, you know, anti-union subjects even after the work-related conversations had been completed.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify again for everyone listening. So it wasn't just a workers' meeting. There may have been employment stuff covered, but then it bled into either preventing a union from being elected, correct?
Correct. They knew that the work meeting was taking place, and they used that as an opportunity to create a captive audience meeting.
You guys just want to differentiate between the work meetings and stuff for meaningful employment versus political, ideological, or anti-union. Or pro-union, for that matter, right?
Exactly. Correct.
No? Yes, maybe?
Yes, I said yes.
No, Ms. Jackson kind of looked at me. Okay. Now, and again, I'm sure the bill covered this, so this is just for clarification. Well, this meeting, they could still have a meeting about dealing with religious preferences via head wraps, days off, things of that nature, correct? So when you talk about religion, because I can't imagine what that would be when the religious side of the meetings that we're discussing, but when it comes to dealing with religious tolerance or religious rights, that would, I guess that's labor laws, that's explaining people their rights under the labor laws, right? Agree, right?
Yes.
So you're not trying to interfere with that?
No.
Got you. Okay, so.
Or if it's a religious organization, not stopping them from having those meetings.
Well, without a doubt. I was going to go ahead and get that one away.
Okay.
Yeah, correct. I think we have Pippi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So it looks like educational institutions are excluded from this. Is that correct?
Delegate, I believe religious educational institutions are prohibited here, yes.
So it just says educational institution, doesn't say religious one.
Can you just, are
Sure,
you
it's
looking at a?
page 2, line 13.
I think it's specifically saying an educational institution that is exempt from the requirements of Title VII. So I'm happy to dig into that and get back to you on who exactly that covers, yes.
Okay. So would this apply to like public schools?
I don't believe so. I think there's already existing protections for, you'll see testimony from MSCA that's supported, but their workers wouldn't be directly impacted by this. There's already protections for public employees in the state.
So I mean, just generally, would this bill apply to like government units?
Well, there's already protections for public employees in the state. This is for all other employees that are already covered by existing state law.
This body passed a law not allowing state monies to be used for captive audiences for their employees in the state. That's in the PERV.
Okay. And the only reason I bring that up is like, you know, there's, and I don't know if that's the case, but I think there's other units where there's a lot of encouragement to join unions, and it almost has the opposite effect of what you're trying to do in this bill, kind of on the other side of it, especially as it pertains to like public schools and joining the union, public school unions and teacher unions and all that kind of stuff. So that's something I'd be really concerned with, in line with what you're concerned with, if that makes sense.
I'm trying to wrap my head there.
They're not mandatory.
But they're not captive audience meetings when they're doing that.
Okay.
And something that the unions probably wouldn't want me to say, but even with the state law that require, bans state money for captive audience meetings, there is a time carved out for the union to speak to new hires, but anybody can leave. They don't have to stay there and hear the union's pitch.
Okay.
So it's just a balanced approach.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Delegate Vogel, the bill has a couple things. Number one, I'm not seeing an enforcement provision, which I think you talked about maybe in your testimony. But the other thing I'll note before I ask the question is that on page 2, line 16, it says an employer may not. Now, quite often in our committee, we'll see may or shall language. So, the fact that it doesn't say an employer shall not kind of goes to my question. If there's no enforcement mechanism, and under your bill, it's a may not, not a shall not, what is it that you're trying to actually accomplish other than putting words into the state law books?
That's a fair question, Delegate, and I will say that specific section is guarding against retaliation, right? That's the goal we're getting at there. In terms of an enforcement mechanism, that's something that I'm happy to work on if the committee's looking for stronger language there. But it's always that's always an additional challenge of who is responsible for that enforcement, but something that we can speak with the Department of Labor of as well and see who's willing to engage in that enforcement.
So my follow-up to that is on that same page right above where it says an employer may not, it's speaking about the Civil Rights Act. And in the fiscal note, it looks like information sources say Maryland Commission on Civil Rights was conferred to get some opinions. So if I go into the fiscal note, they do sort of talk about the bill not having enforcement mechanisms and that they're expecting the Maryland Department of Labor to issue compliance guidance. And it makes me wonder if one of the guidance pieces is, okay, if you have an employee who wants to file a complaint, I could see where the Department of Labor, not through legislative intent, but rather through just rulemaking, promulgating regulation, would say that it would invite a visit from the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights. Is that sort of where you're headed with this bill? But you can't because, no?
No.
So this bill, with all due respect, I mean, all right, so I started my family business in 1992. It's never occurred to me have a meeting with an agenda that says political and or religious, all right? But what does happen in meetings quite often, and I have a tendency to tamp it down when it comes along because it's irrelevant to business, is when we start talking about politics or about religion. It might not surprise you as a legislator that I go into my business and there's a general chit chat, and I'm not making people show up, and I normally tamp it down, but the way the bill's drafted, I mean, I'm saying, it's not saying here that a employer-sponsored meeting where the agenda is religious or political matters. What it's saying is that an employer-sponsored meeting during which the employer communicates the opinion regarding religious or political matters. Well, I can say that may have occurred. I mean, that may have, and if I had an employee that was particularly offended by my opinion, it looks like this bill gives some breadth to a claim or some type of action, which kind of goes back to, now I'm going to let you answer the question because you were shaking your head, no, this isn't going to lead to the Commission on Civil Rights coming in and visiting a private business person where religious conversation comes up. And I hope that when we finish this back and forth that you'll confirm that's the case, because I believe the Department of Labor, should this bill pass, will watch this hearing and hear what the bill's sponsor's legislative intent is. But I'm hope that what you're not talking about doing is kind of doing an end around where all of a sudden a strong and effective commission can be activated on the view of just a simple mistake during a meeting that has nothing to do with unions, nothing to do with politics, and really nothing to do about religion, but it frankly came up.
Right. Delegate, you raised some very good points, and I would ask that the sponsor get with you and the staff and really make this a credible, if you can pass it, really a credible bill, so that we're not looking to hurt business at all. We're more trying to protect the worker who says, look, I really don't want to hear about the religion, or I don't want to hear about the politics. I'm going to step out, and instead of getting fired or demoted or, getting the bathroom shift, they are protected from that.
I think we're
so
not gonna
if
agree
you
on
guys
that.
could work together, I'd appreciate it.
Yep, okay.
Yes, sir. And I would just add, Delegate, there are a number of states across the country that have already advanced legislation like this. So I'm happy to work with you on looking at, we'll take the lead on looking at those regs and seeing how they've been implemented in other states and get back with your office.
And I guess to that point, in looking over the bill, I guess at this point, if there was a problem, the NLRB would get involved, which is why there doesn't seem to be much of an enforcement mechanism. I'm not sure, because I guess we're envisioning, so if you're at a meeting and training new employees, and I start bad-mouthing our current president, not that I would, wink, wink, and then so I would be in violation under this law, under the, I'm not trying to, I would only, so I know where you're going. I would not be in violation of this. But if someone then, say Steve, walks out of this committee furious that I badmouthed this new president, and then I fired him, at that point, I would be in violation of this law, right?
You'd be in violation even if we didn't have this law.
Huh?
I said we would take it up as a violation even without this.
Right.
But you could say that, and I could just walk out if we have this, and I do the job that brings you wealth.
Right.
So.
We're good.
We're good.
But if I fire you because you walked out, and you walked out after mentioning then that's where this law would take effect, right?
Yes.
And how would that be enforced?
That is something that would be problematic. We don't want to go to NLRB. That costs the business and that costs the state.
I know.
So we need to figure out the enforcement.
Yeah, and we've had conversations with labor about this, and we're happy to have additional conversations to figure out a way to execute a dispute effectively. If I'm happy to work with the committee on an enforcement mechanism here.
Okay. All right, Delegate Fisher.
So it's an interesting bill. I guess before I ask my question, being a native Baltimorean, even though I represent Calvert, I mean, I remember a time when we had GM.
Yeah.
And obviously it was a union shop, and Domino Sugar was there, and McCormick Spice used to actually make spices in downtown Baltimore. You could smell it as soon as you came into town. All those companies are gone, and I know this is not necessarily on topic, but it is, because it goes to union jobs and jobs in general. there just seems to be in my lifetime, since growing up in Baltimore, a massive exodus of companies from the state. I mean, I just curious, like, is there any plan for the unions to help with that, to bring, and I mean, this is a sincere
I'm glad you said
conversation.
that, but it's off topic, Mr. Chair.
And I do have a question on the bill.
I'm sorry. I usually want to, I apologize.
But I will comment that I've met with the governor's staff, I've met with finance and appropriations, the speaker and the president, because I know that at this point, no one has an answer to get out of this that we're in. And we are partners, we are not adversaries.
Cool.
Because without business, we don't have jobs, and without jobs, we don't organize.
Amen to that. So certainly the first part. So my question was going to add on to Delegate Pippy, who did a great job, of course, but it concerns educational institutions. And it says here, and I've read it, it says that it does not apply to, among other things, educational institutions or society that is exempt from requirements of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. So that obviously would be public schools. And I guess the concern is no bill in Annapolis is an island unto itself. I mean, Delegate Vogel, you have a bill that you want to allow 16-year-olds to vote in school board elections. I'm just curious if you're going to allow any kind of speech, which I'm certainly pro-free speech in public schools, including political speech and religious speech, but you're going to have the union advocate in front of 16-year-olds who can vote for school board elections. I mean, it seemed like this bill doesn't work so well with that.
Thank you for the question. I'm having a hard time following how this is connected to other legislation I'm sponsoring. I will say the
union and the schools can go in and advocate. Basically, they're exempt from your bill from going inside of public schools and advocating to children for political matters.
No, we can't.
That's not allowed?
No.
Really?
Unions don't have the right to just walk in anywhere. We have to get permission, even in the state, from the agency or the department that we're going to.
Okay.
And there is nothing, as I said, that makes you stay for that conversation. So that's not there. I will say why we went for the PERB for the state is that we found just in 1 year, UMS spent $1.2 million on anti-union lawyers.
Oh, wow.
So we were like, is that state money or is that foundation money?
I was talking about pre-K to pre-K.
No, I understand.
Higher ed, I think.
And I think MSEA is coming up, so they can address that.
And I think that question specifically is way out of the scope of this
But
legislation.
it does reference it here. It does reference, the educational institutions. So I was just, you
Yeah.
said you were going to provide that clarification at all.
Sure, I'll provide it to you as well,
And
sir.
that's
Yeah.
literally what I'm asking. I'm not
Great.
going outside that. Thank you.
Great, thank you, sir.
I believe that's all the questions for this panel. We'll call up the next few
Thank you
people.
very much.
Thank you very much. Thomas Doyle. Laura Jackson called. Roland Carter. That's it, buddy. Is Mr. Carter, Roland Carter?
This is me.
Yes, sir. You can go ahead.
Good afternoon, Chairman Wilson and the rest of the delegates here. On behalf of the IBW's 4th District, I stand in strong support of the Maryland House Bill 233. The Maryland Worker Freedom Act. This bill is a crucial step towards safeguarding the rights of workers to freely and independently hold their personal, religious, and political beliefs in association. This includes the right to freely join a union without fear of retaliation. Throughout my career, I have seen the impact of captive audience meetings firsthand and can tell you this is a protection that should be afforded to all workers. In today's workforce, employees deserve to work in an environment that is free from mandatory participation in political or religious activities that have no bearing on their job. Unfortunately, we have seen instances where employees attempt to pressure workers into attending meetings or engaging in discussions that do not pertain to their roles, leading to a work culture of intimidation, anxiety, and division. Further, EPI data shows that employers spend $400 million per year on non-avoidance consultants. In other words, captive audience meetings have a very real impact on labor unions like the IBEW. Employers are willing to spend big money to ensure it stays that way. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Wilson and members of the committee. My name is Thomas Doyle. I serve as the State Program Director for the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. We are a labor union representing more than 1.3 million members in the United States and Canada. I'm very glad to be with you today in order to express our strong support for HB 233, the Maryland Worker Freedom Act. We're joined today by members of Local 639 and Local 570. I've also submitted for the record a letter of support for this legislation from Joint Council 62 representing Teamster members here in Maryland. Gallup polling has shown that more than 70% of Americans approve of labor unions. Worker activism over the past 2 years has captured the public's attention in ways that we've not seen in many decades. Yet workers are still struggling to organize. This is because of threats and intimidation from employers, where workers are fearful to exercise their legal rights to stand with their coworkers in order to negotiate a fair contract. A major obstacle for organizing workers is the use of captive audience meetings in which workers are forced to listen to the political opinions of their bosses in closed-door mandatory meetings during work hours. HB 233 protects a worker and their First Amendment rights by allowing them to choose not to participate in these meetings when the topic of the discussion is their boss's political or religious positions. We believe that protecting the freedom of speech is about more than being able to say what you want, but it's about choosing what you want to hear as well. This bill correctly gives a worker the right to return to their work assignments rather than listen to the political opinions of their employer. I wanted to make it clear that the Teamsters Union is willing to work with any elected official who is ready to stand and deliver results for working people, regardless of their political party. We commend Delegate Vogel for leading this effort, and I urge the members of this committee to stand with the 14,000 members of the Teamsters in supporting this bill. Thank you.
Yeah, the Teamsters hold a special place in about half of the people's hearts here, not a good one. So in spite of that, we obviously listen to the merits of these bills. You guys should be grateful that we do, because we focus on the merits, as I believe we're supposed to, and we try not to lean on the past. But it is surprising to see certain people coming up here to testify, supporting this kind of bill, asking us, myself, to support this bill. So, but luckily, we do move for the state of Maryland, and we try to forgive past indiscretions. So, I don't see any questions. We can move on. I think this concludes these bill hearings. Guys, we have a meeting today at elected attendance. Vice Chair blows
Mr. Chair, could I say something about the crash?